Good morning, everyone. I think we're about to begin our weekly Torah class. And so this week, instead of doing the weekly Parsha, I thought, how could I not teach a little bit about Purim, seeing as we are just days away from celebrating the festival of Purim. And so what I want to do is, I'm sure many of you recall the story of Purim, but just a little review for those who are tuning in wondering, because Purim, even though it's, of course, a significant holiday, it's certainly not on the same caliber. If you ask someone, the themes of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we're actually going to talk about Yom Kippur in a few moments. Um, that might be a quicker answer than Purim. But the idea is that Purim is the holiday where you start the story with one understanding of how events may turn out, and the story is completely upside down by the end of the narrative. And the main characters include this King Achashverosh. The story goes that he was first married to Queen Vashti, and he asked Vashti to come and dance before all of kind of the international ministers at a great and lavish party. And Vashti refused to do so because when you say dance, it implies not the most modest kind of dancing. So she refused. Uh, King Achashverosh banishes Vashti. There's plenty in the Talmud and Midrash that for another day as to what happens to Vashti, which is kind of a fun text study within itself. Feel free to message me for some of that material. And so what does King Achashverosh have to do? He has to find a new queen. And so some say it's kind of like in a beauty pageant fashion, but somewhere along those lines, King Achashverosh chooses a new queen, and it happens to be the famous Esther. Now, what King Achashverosh doesn't know is that Esther is Jewish. This doesn't come up till much, much later in the story, but she is chosen, we are told, for her beauty, for her grace, for her kindness. And she is supported, if you will. Some say it's her uncle, some say it's her cousin, Mordecai. So we have Mordecai behind the scenes. And we're told that Queen Esther, according to the Megillah, is really kind of put in this story for a time like this because there's an evil minister who is guiding the king. His name is, and you can all boo after I say this, hopefully not booing the Torah study, but booing the man, Haman. And Haman, his intent is to rid the kingdom of the Jewish people. So here you have Esther, you have Mordecai advising her, you have King Achashverosh and Haman advising him. And throughout the story, you hear Haman saying, okay, we're going to, oops, sorry about this, one second. We are going to, take different measures to, rid the kingdom of this terrible people. And Mordecai gets kind of word of this decree, and he advises Esther to be brave and to have courage and to go up to the king at times where he will be more persuaded to say, listen, you have someone in your kingdom that wants to kill me. And he said, of course not. You're my queen. I love you. I would never do something to hurt you. And she said, well, guess what? I'm Jewish. And that's when the story is kind of flipped upside down. And where King Achashverosh is, if you will, his eyes are open to Haman's evil ways and his trickery. And so what he ends up doing is, we thought at the beginning of the story that the Jews were going to meet their demise, but by the end of the story, it's Haman that meets his demise. So that's the story of Purim, really you can see a 4-minute or 5-minute nutshell. But the greater themes of Purim, and one in particular that I want to speak about today, is this idea of fate. Who actually controls our steps that we take, and what's kind of the greater plan in the universe? Because if you look at the story of Purim, Pur means lots. It's a lottery system. Um, one might think that everything is up to chance. Like I just said, you might be at the top of your life on one day, and at the next day you get a phone call and everything changes. And I know many people have experienced this kind of topsy-turvy nature in their lives. And often people ask the question, and I think the question that has been asked so very often, especially since October 7th, and in a post-Holocaust world, in a post-Shoah world, people ask the question, where's God in the story of Purim? Because if you look closely at the Megillah, you will not explicitly see God's name. And that's a hard fact for many people to absorb. If God's name is not explicitly mentioned in the scroll, in the Megillah, in the story of Purim, does that mean that God is not present in the story of Purim? So for the next, I don't know, 10 minutes or so, maybe a little longer, we're going to study this idea of God's hiddenness, both in the story of Purim and God's hidden nature in our greater lives. Like I said, post October 7th in a post Shoah world, I can't tell you how many people have come up to me saying, Rabbi, where is God on all of this? Where's God? And I want to give you a few different answers that our text reveals. But I'm just going to kind of hit to the punchline at the beginning. I am a firm believer that God plays a powerful role in our lives. While I don't believe that God is a puppeteer, moving our directions this way and that, I do believe that God is a guiding hand in every step that we take. And when we see terrible, horrific things happen in this world, I'm not a believer that God is orchestrating those events. I'm a firm believer, and we'll talk about this a little bit, in free will, that God gives each and every one of us, when creation occurred, that God gave each and every one of us the ability to make significant choices in our lives. And in offering us that gift, that's where I believe evil plays a hand. And when evil occurs, I believe that God is crying with us. Okay, that was a little bit of a tangent. Let me tell you a little bit about this idea of the concealed face of God. So I'm going to just read a little bit. This is by Stephen Arnoff, and his article is "The Concealed Face of God. Why isn't God mentioned in the book of Esther?" And these are his words, and I want to reflect on them for a little bit. Many of the serious messages of Purim are encoded in wordplay and irony, and the book of Esther's seemingly absent God is no exception. The centrality of the concept, and here's the concept that we're going to hold on to today, Hester Panim. Maybe you can hear the wordplay in there. Hester Panim, the concealed face of God to Purim, is recognized in the fact that Esther is the only text in the Hebrew Bible, he says, except for the Song of Songs, that does not mention the name of God explicitly. And he continues, in the case of Purim, Hester Panim's importance is also intimated by the name of the heroine of the central narrative of the festival, Esther. The Talmud states, from where does the Torah bring the name Esther? From the following verse in Devarim, but I, God, will surely conceal my face, Haster Panai, on that day for all the ill that they have done, for they have turned to other gods. The name Esther is interpreted as an extension of the phrase for a concealed God. And so you have to ask the question, if Esther's name is supposed to embody this idea of a concealed God, then God is actually in the narrative of Purim. And so the extension of that question is, well, then where? Where is God? If God is concealed in the story, then where's God? And the typical answer given would be Esther, that Esther's involvement, her bravery, her courage, that she herself is, if you will, like I said at the beginning, God's guiding hand in a story where often people may say, I really don't see God in this story. So that's kind of one piece I want you to hold on to. The overarching question, where is God in the Purim story? The idea, the phrase Hester Panim, of God's concealed face. And if God's face is concealed in Purim, it means that God is there. So where is God? And one might say, God is in the character, not God is not Esther, but God is, if you will, woven in to Esther's characteristics and qualities that allow her to be the heroine that we need at this particular time to save the Jewish people. So what I want to offer you now, this is a famous story because now, if you take that idea of Hester Panim, that in a narrative of the Jewish people in the Megillah, we don't see God's name, but God is actually concealed within the text, and it's our job to reveal God throughout the story. Then we have to extend the question, is God less hidden than we think? When we are going through some of the most difficult times in our lives and we ask the question, where is God? Are we the ones? Are we the ones that are ignoring God's sign? We have to figure out where is God hiding? Or maybe, like I said, is God less hidden than we think? So this is a famous story, but I want to bring it because I think you'll enjoy it. The story goes as follows. It was a flood like we haven't seen for many, many years. And a man lived by a river, and he saw that his home was in danger of being flooded by the river. And so he said to God, God, please save me from this river. Please save me from this flood. Well, what happens? A few moments, a fire truck comes by, and the fire man says to the man who's worried about drowning, come on, get on the fire truck. Let's get out of here. I'm here to save you. And the man says, no worries. I just prayed to God. I know that God will save me. So the fireman just kind of shakes his head and walks along. And the water from the river continues to rise. And the man is very concerned. And so he walks to the second floor of his apartment building. And again, he pleads with God and says, God, you have to save me. I don't know what to do. And so what happens? A boat drifts by the apartment building, sees the man on the second floor. He's out on a balcony and says, hey, get in. I'm here to save you. But we know what the man would say. The man says to the guy on the boat, I don't need your help because listen, I'm praying to God. God will save me. Finally, the man, because now the waters are rising higher and higher, totally engulfing the apartment building. He's now on the roof of the apartment building. And a helicopter looks at the man and throws him a rope. There's a person, the pilot in the helicopter throws him a rope and says, listen, I'm here to save you. Take the rope. And the man says, you know, I don't need your rope because God will save me. Well, this man, he wasn't the best swimmer, so you kind of imagine what occurs at the end of the story. And he says to God at the end of the story, listen, I put my trust in you. Why didn't you save me after all of these attempts? And God replies, I can't believe you. Didn't you see me? I saved you multiple times. I sent you a fire truck. I sent you a boat. I sent you a helicopter. I was there to save you, but you weren't there to save yourself. I know it seems like a simple story, but I think it's an excellent example of how God exists in each of our lives. I'm just looking outside today. It's such a rainy day, and one might say on a rainy day, it's very hard to see the light behind the clouds, even though we know that it exists. Once it's a gray, rainy day, it's very hard to see the hope and the light that exists. It's hard to see God, even though God is just concealed for a few moments. It's up to us to move the clouds away to see God's ever-present light. And so I want you to hold on to that story, because how many times in our lives do we say, I just should have listened to that person. It was that person who had the best advice. Or, you know what? That was a sign. It was an open door that I was supposed to walk through, but I just ignored it, thinking something else, something better was going to come along. How many times in our day is God trying to speak with us and touch us and impact us? But we say to ourselves, nope, I don't think God is in this moment. So the other question that I want to leave you with, or kind of another story, um, is how much does God play a role in our lives? How much do we want God to play a role in our lives? How much do we want to have that balance between having free will and choice and God gently guiding us along the way? And so I have another interesting story that maybe you've heard before, more of a metaphor for uh, God's involvement in our lives. So it goes as following. If a child is told not to eat a cookie by its mother, but the mother remains in the kitchen to watch, then the child won't touch the cookie. I mean, I don't know if it's your kids or my kids. My kids still might eat the cookie, but let's pretend that the kid's listening to the mother. But once the mother leaves the room entirely, now it's the child's free choice that determines what happens to the mother's ruling. At the same time, when the mother leaves the room, she's aware of her child's behavior. She's listening for danger. Hopefully, she's ready to jump in if the child needs help. And so we take that story, or we take that analogy, and we think about God, that God has, if you will, left the room and has given us space to make our own free choices. But God is still on the periphery, watching and hopefully guiding us to help us protect our choices from something that might lead our choices to walking towards something that will bring us ultimate harm. So I like that analogy, that God is on the periphery, watching, listening, gently guiding, but ultimately it's up to us whether or not we choose to take that cookie. There's a story that is adapted from the philosopher Martin Buber. And the story goes as follows. Rabbi Baruch's grandson, Yechiel, comes running into his study, and he is crying. He's in tears. Yechiel, Yechiel, why are you crying? Asked his grandfather. And his sobbing grandson explained, I was playing hide and seek with my friend, but he stopped looking for me and left me alone. Rabbi Baruch caressed Yechiel's face, and with tears welling up in his own eyes, his grandfather whispered softly, God too, Yechiel, God too is weeping, for he too has been hidden with no one looking for him. I think it's a beautiful story, because how often do we say to ourselves, where is God hiding in my life? Instead of thinking to ourselves, is God crying because we haven't been willing to look for God? And I just want to leave you with one more idea. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful idea about the Ner Tamid. We just studied about the Ner Tamid in last week's Parsha, but I'm going to bring it back this week. And this piece of commentary is by Rabbi Helen Cohn. And she speaks about the Ner Tamid as a representation of God's eternal presence. What she says is the following. She says, when we think about the Ner Tamid, the way that we translate that, lehalot ner tamid, is to light the lamp continually, to light the lamp continually. And so she gives a few different interpretations of what that means. She says that one might look at to light the lamp continually as lighting the lamp from evening to morning. And another piece of Midrash interprets lehalot ner tamid as the lights in the sanctuary, or sorry, the Ner Tamid would stay lit perpetually. So it would stay lit forever. And so she asked the question, well, which one is it? Is a light relit every evening, or is a light supposed to burn continually? And she says, in true Jewish fashion, let's say both are accurate readings. So, what can we learn from this? And she writes, the continual burning light reminds us that the eternal one, that God is present always, everywhere. This presence can be felt during our bright, joyful days and during the days of darkness that descend on us all. It is an eternal light of holiness, a symbol of God's continual, perpetual presence in our lives, everywhere, not just in the synagogue. And she ends with this: God doesn't need light. The command for light continually is for our own sake, a symbol that God is always present and that we need to continually rekindle our desire to experience that presence and live our lives in its light. And so, to bring us full circle, I started this morning asking the question, where does God play a role in the story of Purim? And we call that idea Hester Panim, that God's face is concealed in the story because we don't see God's name explicitly mentioned in the text. But if we come towards the end of my study, really God's face and God's presence is all throughout the story of Purim, that God is gently guiding each of us, that while we have free will and while we each make choices, like I said, of our own willingness, um, through our own insight, through our own wisdom, sometimes succeeding and oftentimes failing, God's presence is there, just like the Ner Tamid, continually. But it's up to us to look for God. It's up to us to ensure that God does not remain hidden within what we see as darkness, but rather every time we acknowledge God's presence in this world, that's when God's holy light illuminates us all. I hope you have a wonderful morning, and I hope you feel God's presence now and always.